Hey again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking of Sundara, where we talk about Sundara Dawn of a New Age, a fantasy setting for D&D 5e and Pathfinder Classic. And it's been a while since we've done one of these episodes, but I've got something special for everybody in that you're not just going to be listening to me talk today. We also have a contributor of ours who has added a lot of fun stuff to the setting that I get to have the fun of discovery for because I didn't make it, even though it's technically my world. But Isaiah, please tell us about yourself.
Hey, my name is Isaiah Burt. I am a dark fantasy author with a particular focus on tabletop games. Dungeons and Dragons in particular has been part of my creative diet for as long as I can remember. I got into the Pathfinder scene about 10 years ago when I reached out to Flaming Crab Games and pitched a custom class that they published, and then I've just kept on going from here. And I got into Sundara when I started reading Neal's phenomenal work, especially starting with Iron Fire. And I pitched the idea of writing a novella, and he sent me along to his publisher. We've been rocking and rolling with that ever since. I'm very happy to be on here. Thank you for having me, Neal.
Thank you for coming. That's actually a fun little thing. I didn't know that we had both also done stuff for Flaming Crab, so we've got more connections than we thought we did. This keeps happening every time I'm on something with another designer. It's always, and then I worked for this obscure company that like 12 people watching this have heard of, and I'm like, what do you mean? I have also worked for that random obscure company.
Yeah,
Uh,
funny story about that because that was my first ever paycheck in any professional capacity, even before I started working at stores and whatnot. Yeah, so Demon Shaman base class, check it out.
nice. Yeah, can highly recommend. I have taken a look at that one. That was fun.
Thank
But
you.
anyway, so for folks who came in late, or perhaps you're wondering what is the setting that we're talking about, and you don't want to go back through the other 40 some odd videos that make up the series up to this point, Sundara was kind of designed to be an organic, weird fantasy setting of, it's definitely got that kitchen sink feel, but I wanted it to feel less like we were trying to purposefully cram in every single genre that we could and more that if you leave a fantasy world alone long enough and it just ferments into something weird, this is what you're gonna get. Which brings me to my first question for you, Isaiah, of what is it that drew you to Sundara as a contributor, as a fan, as a reader? Because I know what I wanted to hook people with, but I'm curious as to whether or not that's what got you.
So when I read Iron Fire and started learning about Dragon Seal and especially the mercenary culture. That immediately I connected it with the Iron Kingdom setting by Privateer Press.
Good choice.
For for those of you who may not be familiar, they published the tabletop miniatures game War Machine. I have a decade of War Machine experience under my belt. I played during most of Mark II. And admittedly, that's how I got into a lot of the gaming scene. But I immediately saw that connection. And of course, as anybody who knows me can attest, I love things with fire. I'm a very simple man. I see fire and I smile. I run right toward it. So we got fire, we got sharp swords, we got these mercenaries, we got gunpowder, we got dragons, hell to the yeah. It
Oh,
was just all of that. It was like a clarion call for everything Isaiah.
that actually, I had not thought of War Machine in a while. Now I want to put mechs in here. I'm gonna have to make a whole new city just for mechanization now.
Friend, I was actually thinking about that because in the upcoming supplement that I just sent off to Adrian, settlements of the Dragon's Breath mountains. So for those of you listening, definitely keep an eye out for that, especially if you love Iron Fire as much as I do. I actually included a few options for that in my whispers and rumors, so that could be a thing we can include.
Shiny. And for folks who are listening to this who are wondering, are these two just really bad at communication? I'm going to pull back the curtain and give everyone a bit of a behind the scenes. Of while I technically started the setting and while, Isaiah has contributed to it, as has Adrian Kennelly, for folks who haven't checked out his contributions to the setting, he's had at least half a dozen, maybe a dozen supplements now. Of we don't sit down in a room and discuss what it is we're going to do and go forward with like a bullet point list of what we're going to add. So often I'm just as surprised as everybody else when stuff comes out, and then I get to have that little bit of discovery and decide which things I want to, try and expand on. And if I see something really cool, I try to reach out to the person who made it. But normally it's just like, oh, I guess that's in the world now. Neat. And then I use that to spark whatever's coming out next. So I like the idea that we started with Ironfire and now it's kind of getting oh, what's the word? Sort of supplementary like cities and towns that are springing up around it as we go, and more people just get interested. That's very much how I was hoping the setting would grow, and I'm hoping that we can bring some folks in on the journey for that one. Let's see. We did have a bullet list for this conversation though, so we had a do 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 do. There we are. And since you've talked about your favorite aspect of the setting, I don't have something as specific, though I will say I got into it by accident, and I'm sure Isaiah knows this story, but for those of you who haven't seen the episode about it, Sundara kind of got made by accident, again, with Ironfire. There's a city generator that Adrian Kennelly kicked to me because I had done a collection of fantasy towns, and that did really, really well, and people seemed to really like that. So obviously, the next thing he sent me an email was, "Hey, I want you to do another one of those about cities." So I was like, "Oh, but I really like cities, and cities are big, and they should get more than just a couple pages in a single supplement." And then I just clicked through the automatic generator until it gave me Ironfire, and I was like, "That is a really cool name. I like this city." And I found the art that was in the Godbound art pack that we were all allowed to use because they are phenomenal people over at Sinomine, as far as I'm aware. So they just let us use all of their cool assets. And that just kind of has been spiraling. Although, speaking of, as Isaiah mentioned, with whispers and rumors, of that is another thing I'm really enjoying, though it might be kind of subtle for folks out there who are watching the setting development. Is that lots of the times when I have an idea, and I feel like this is something that you've also been doing, Isaiah, but don't let me put words in your mouth, is if we have an idea and we don't know if we want to flesh it out yet, we just kind of toss it in there as a couple of whispers and see if people react to it. And then if they do, we're like, ah, yes, you were very smart. You picked up on that was what was coming down the road. Just good on you for your very close eye of reading that.
There's absolutely that. And another thing that I've really enjoyed about using the whispers and rumors is I've gotten to play with them more in settlements of the Dragon's Breath Mountain, is including more Easter eggs about some of my own personal influences, a few little flourishes where including more of them might not necessarily fit the setting at this juncture, but there's definitely room there to name a few so people can be on the lookout. I included one homage to Bionicle in there, if anybody
Yes.
out there remembers that. Right, right.
Classic.
I included another homage, of course, to World of Warcraft. Love World of Warcraft. Well, okay, we're not gonna jump down that rabbit hole. I have a whole spiel about that. But yeah, no, I also used it to include a few Easter eggs.
And I will say for anyone who's watching this who's thinking into about getting into game design, but you always say it's like, ah, my world is just a whole bunch of hodgepodge ideas I've stolen from other people. Is I'll let you in on a secret. All of us are like that. The only difference is that when you finally publish it, you have to go through and file off the serial numbers really well so that people can't be sure. I will say if you go through any classic or famous published setting, unless they took place, even the ones that took place really far at the beginning of the hobby, if you know your pulp fiction, if you know your fantasy, you will find the homages. Like none of us are doing anything completely original. Like, yeah,
Actually, if I may, take a quick aside with a literary opinion of mine.
absolutely.
Elric of Melniboné, it is a
Mhm.
travesty that more people do not know about him.
Yeah, also fun side to end up making my point there of for anyone who plays Pathfinder Classic for their home setting of Golarion, which is of course the one that I really loved, and it was kind of the feeling I wanted to have of something similar to that as far as vastness and possibility when making Sundara. I love Zon-Cathon and I love the nation of Nidal. Part of what I didn't know, because when I started playing the game, I had not yet read any of the Elric novels. And then I read them during quarantine, and I was like, all of the really cool things that I thought were original in and about Nidal are just references to all of them, which doesn't make me love it any less. But I did have that moment of, I thought this was really unique and original. Turns out, like, Moorcock made this up like 50 years ago. So yeah, it doesn't matter where it is. Nothing out there is wholly original. All you can do is go forth with confidence and design like your heart depends on it. Oh.
And actually another aspect of the Sundara setting that I really want to touch on that I enjoy is the Prim, because we're talking about how nothing's new under the sun. But with the Prim, I immediately drew comparisons to the Warp from Warhammer.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that was why I did it, but it was at least part of the reason that I did it.
But the thing about that was just having this whole realm of pure magic, and the thing that makes me really love it more was once I had discussions about Neal, because in my own home games of Pathfinder, for those who played under me, they know that I love using the devils. They know that I love the nine hells. Like those are my favorite nasties. I'm sure my wife might chime in with that. And and being able to reconcile still using those stat blocks while being free from alignment in the setting with this realm of pure magic, like that was, I feel that's a real game changer right there. So I can still use these creatures, but I'm free to use them in innovative ways.
And that is something I really wanted to do because when I first sat down to design Sundara, it was the thing everybody asked for if they wanted an alignment-free Pathfinder or an alignment-free Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, yeah, that's a cool idea, but it's a again, another thing that anyone who's out there watching this thinking, how do I become a game designer? What do I need to be aware of when I make my world? Is that your complaints as a player are often just the tip of the iceberg as to what is going on behind the scenes. And that was the thing that I found out. I had thoughts about it before with alignment because most players, when you tell them, like, hey, there's alignment, like their frustrations are things like, but I wanted to play a paladin barbarian and I can't, or like, I want to summon this kind of creature, but it's opposite my alignment, so now I can't do that. And it's messing with what I want to do with my flavor and my fun. But when it comes to building the world, it's one of those of like, you can have creatures of pure law, pure chaos, pure good, pure evil, and it's not an opinion of the cosmos has decided this is capital E evil. It is irredeemable. There's nothing you can do about it, blah. And that sort of sets the tone for the whole universe. And stripping that out can be very freeing, but it leaves you with that question of like, well, that's a big old power vacuum. What do I replace that with? And so that was something I tried to lean into when making the setting. It's that there aren't really good or evil options, but there are options that, will be more or less moral depending on where you're from. And morality can vary vastly depending on, like, someone who is like, from Archbliss is going to have, floating up in the sky with their 8 generations of cosmic power is going to have a very different idea of how to solve things from, an orc chieftain who is boots on the ground trying to just take care of his people. And neither of them is going to be good, neither of them is going to be evil, but they're going to have very different, cultural moralities. They're going to have very different experiences, and they're going to have very different ideas of how problems should be solved. And that's kind of what I wanted players to tap into, to have that question of like, well, if you get permission from everyone and you have the resources and you have the body parts, yeah, you could summon a skeleton army to fight that outsider who's trying to take over this world, and you're not going to have to worry about it tainting your soul. But are you going to have a reputation of that guy who stole all the bodies of our loved ones to try and fight a skeleton war? Which, is a different problem, but also the same problem. But it's a thing that I found a lot of players who objected to a setting without that kind of alignment, that kind of guiding compass. Forget that your alignment and your morality aren't the same thing. You can get rid of alignment, you still have all those moral questions, but now you just have more options. So you get to you can, as you mentioned, play with any of the really fun tools that are normally in the evil characters only box, but you're still going to get a lot of shady looks if you use that spell that like pulls somebody's intestines out and just like immediately like entangles them with it. But yeah, it's like, yeah, getting back to the warp of that was part of why, because I'd been big into 40K for several years at this point, And I always thought that was a really interesting way of doing it, of whatever, whatever the power you're using is drawn from this other place. It's just how are you utilizing it, which also in following with the like little, little changes can cause big rock slides. It's a thing that I've kind of kept subtle, but folks have occasionally noticed it, of wizards are not top of the food chain in Sundara because, if you have a wizard, it's like, cool, take away a spell book. Now what?
Right?
Yeah, he's only
Right.
dangerous for a brief period of time unless he can find a way to get that back. And we normally don't do that to our players because it's kind of a dick move. But it's one of those of like, there's a sorcerer. What do you do? Pray. Because if he is powerful enough, if he is undisciplined enough, you are all in a lot of trouble. And that was kind of the feeling I wanted them to have, of, similar to 40K psychers, of some of them are heroic and some of them are dangerous and some of them are really undisciplined, and that can lead to huge issues, particularly if a floating city were to fall out of the sky.
How could that possibly go wrong? Floating city falling out of the sky? Don't see the problem.
I'm sure it'll
Don't
be
worry.
fine. It's been up there for thousands of years. Nothing bad ever happens in this setting. This is a fantasy setting. Oh, but that does get me to a question I've had for you, and it's something I've been interested in because I know what the answer is for me, but I'll kick it to you first. Of what are some things we have not yet done with Sundara that you think would be fun to explore, or that you would personally enjoy adding to, aside from obviously the giant diesel punk mechs, which we just discussed?
Right, right. Well, I was actually having a thought earlier today because I know I've poked you a bit multiple times about adding minotaurs of Sundara.
That's on my
N-
list.
Yeah, no, minotaurs have become kind of a pet race of mine. But I was thinking about having a city of like noble artificer minotaurs,
Ooh.
where we could have something like the Protoss of StarCraft meets that more down to earth steampunk feel of War Machine, where they're definitely more noble and high magic, but absolutely very very crafty, very crafty. A lot of engineering there. So that's just kind of an idea that came out of my head today
All right, so an
that I
idea I'm
would.
gonna idea I'm gonna kick to you and to anybody who happens to be watching this. Of we have their first innovator Daedalus and his creations of the Brazen Bulls, which in this case are not horrendous torture machines, but are in fact like very large mechanized defense units. Just gonna set that over there for now. We'll come back to that at a later time.
We definitely will, because the thing that I'm a huge fan of adding more to the setting, especially once I read Horde Reach. And for those out there who may not know, my second Sunzara novella, Blightbane's Gambit, is set in Horde Reach and the surrounding area, is the fact that it is the capital for monstrous races. Because when I got into D&D, a quick story about my history. When I was 10 years old, I was introduced to AD&D second edition. So
Oof.
I cut my teeth on THAC0. And it wasn't until I got into 3.0 that I discovered that you can play stuff beyond human, dwarf, elf, halfling. I found a lot of those boring. I'm the guy where I read the Outer Planes appendix and flipped straight to the Beatezu. So so when I read Horde Reach, and it's like, oh, so we have ogres, goblins, orcs, all of those things are normalized like that. I just saw that avenue. So more monstrous races is absolutely something I want to include. After Minotaurs, I would say gargoyles. Gargoyles of Sundara.
Yeah, there's actually an audio drama that I'm working on right now, which is not specifically connected to Sundara, but it does have it's from what was the supplement? 100 Town Guards. And the intro features a unique guard unit dealing with someone trying to steal the taxes of the entire town for the past year. And we have, in addition to a gargoyle, there is a golem and a pseudo dragon of the strike force. So I'm currently playing around and trying to get gargoyle voice just right. It should be fun. But yeah, it's like
Nice.
Minotaurs and gargoyles have been two of the big requested ones because, like, A, who doesn't love Minotaurs, and B, like, who doesn't want yet another, player race that starts with the ability to fly, even if it's not well.
Hmm.
Ah, so many things, so many times. Actually, that does give me an interesting question for you, and this is just kind of a flavor thing. I just want to fill a bit of time with because it's fun. As you know, because I'm sure you've read some of the Species of Sundara books. I
Hmm.
try to break them down into a bunch of like differentiated versions, so it's not just like here's the one creature type and they're all like this. Broadly speaking, what would you do to differentiate gargoyle types?
Ooh, man, you are hardcore putting me on the spot there, but I love it. I love it. So, the first thing that pops into mind. So the campaign that I was running not, well, about a year or so ago, it was with my wife and my best friend as players. We ran like a 3 year long campaign in the Planescape setting for Pathfinder Classic. And my younger brother played with us for a time, and he played a gargoyle character. I think that's why I have a soft spot for him now.
That's fair.
And he wanted to play a gargoyle where his magic items were like runes etched into his stone body.
Ooh,
So
that's fun.
right, like I applauded him definitely for the creativity, especially since this was his first dip into Pathfinder Classic. Really, he'd been more familiar with 5e, so a bit of a jaunt there. But off the top of my head, I would say I would want to walk the continuum between kind of like, I know there's a World of Darkness game about this. It's like
Oh, I
Promethean,
love Promethean.
right. I dabbled with it like once way back when, but walking that continuum between like being just a completely stone golem-like creature to being completely human and biological. So we could have different types of gargoyles along that continuum. Way back when I was still in junior high, high school, one of the people I was playing with, she pitched an idea of a more biological based gargoyle.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely something like that. Another idea, like what you did with the orcs of Sundara, that's the supplement I have the most experience with.
That's
Blightbane's
fair. Yeah,
Gambit
for
is a
reasons.
right, yeah. Blightbane's Gambit is about orcs. Is we could definitely have gargoyles for different environments. I mean, we haven't seen many underwater type gargoyles, have we?
Hmm.
So we could do something like that.
Yeah. Hold that thought. Hello again, everyone. Apologies for the technical interruption, but I refused to pay for an upgraded version of Zoom, so it only gave us so long to get that first half. So this is the bonus half of the content. But we were talking about gargoyles, and it reminded us to get back on track. So there is a question that I have for you, and it's what do you think makes Sundara a setting people should play in? What do you think is something that people overlook that would solve some of the issues that you've seen like players complain about or game masters complain about when they try to run either D&D 5e or Pathfinder or another setting that we or another system that we might convert it to down the line?
Oh, that is a really good question. What is one overlooked aspect of Sundara that I think would make it simpler for a lot of game masters and solve player complaints? The first thing that really jumps out to me is how you approached it with the idea of soft canon.
Mm,
And for those who may not be familiar, Neal has an article on his Taking 10 blogspot blog about the concept of soft canon, where everything is canon, not everything is true. And so you have this great tapestry of storytelling, but the details of it, well, they're not rules, they're more so what you call guidelines. Because Actually, one of the things I was thinking about before we hopped on to do this was that one of the things that drew me to really wanting to write for Sundara, beyond the adding another professional credit feather to my cap, because that is always fun to do, no matter what stage you are in the process.
That's true.
Beyond that, it was being able to tell these stories where I could use all of the things I'd grown up with, where I could literally do what I used to do when I first started writing and crack open the monster manual and go, well, I'm gonna yank that, and just throw it all together. But the thing I ran into trying to use a lot of other settings, even when I mentioned Iron Kingdoms and World of Warcraft earlier as parallels that I drew, was they have these really dense monoliths of lore and world building, where, yeah, they are really great settings, but they tend to be really rigid in terms of what you can and can't include. And they have a lot of very set in stone plot lines and story arcs and whatnot. So like for World of Warcraft, for example, you can't run a game set in that setting and pretend like the Third War, the events of Warcraft 3 didn't happen. And you really kind of have to obey that. With Sundara, though, we really don't have that. We definitely have major historical events that happened in the past, and we absolutely have major players, but they are not so thoroughly defined that they end up becoming constraining. And I feel that's one aspect that a lot of players and game masters do overlook. Because at least in my experience, since I typically play with a lot of people who have a wargaming background, they tend to kind of overlook the story and plot aspects of game mastering. So I feel like for the more, well, I hesitate to use the term creatively inclined, but we'll say story and plot inclined individuals among us. I would say that Sundar representing an open canvas, that negative space, using negative to mean absence, is actually something that is easy to overlook because I'm pointing out something that's not there.
That is very fair, and that's actually a really good way of phrasing it. It's not how I would have thought about it myself until just now. Man, it's actually something I feel that carries through with this is just my piggyback onto the question of because when I sat down to do a lot of the religious aspects of Sundara, because divine casters are still very much a thing, it was a thing that I started to notice in lots of games that started to really bother me. And I have another video on this for anyone who wants to go back and check it out on the channel. But it's that knowledge that if you are, a class cleric in most other, D&D 3.5 and forward, and even further back into like second edition when they were priests, you had very definite ideas that like your faith wasn't a risk. You knew your deity was real. They spoke to you in some way. They gave you real power. And like there might be parts of them you can't comprehend because you're immortal, but there wasn't really a gamble of you weren't gonna just like die one day and then find out it was like, oh no, the whole religion you dedicated yourself to is no, it didn't exist. It was all made up. And that made it feel not less powerful, but a lot less mystical. Of it was treated very much like fact, and that was a thing. And it happens in a lot of other settings as well. Of you have this idea that well, if the gods are real, and if their clergy represents them, then clearly the clergy will be given like actual social position, and we will listen to what the gods have to say. And so you have this merging of myth and history. And I very much wanted to not do that. So you'll still have these big mythical stories told in parts of Sundara, but as I mentioned in Gods of Sundara, you can have entire holy wars where both sides are worshiping the same deity. and that deity does not care. Now, as was mentioned earlier, Khorne cares not from where the blood flows. And if a bunch of his followers, each are arguing over what's the proper color of armor and what should we call him, he doesn't care. Whoever wins, that'll be the one that gets to decide it.
Well, and that actually brings me to something that I want to piggyback on when I was talking about why I liked the Prim so much. When I read the Gods of Sundara supplement, I really enjoyed how you executed that structure where you had kind of the base face or identity of the god, but also examples where you could assign different names, different characteristics, different appearances, different personalities to them. Because something I had noted, especially when reading D&D 3.5 supplements, was they tried. I give them an A for effort, where they tried to be like, well, these people here, they worship this god this way, and these people here, they worship the same god this way and have, different rituals and whatnot. But it doesn't lack, well, it doesn't have as much weight to it when I can flip open deities and demigods and go, oh, well, that god in this game is objectively this. He is a 60 hit die outsider with 20 levels of wizard, 20 levels of fighter, and that, and that. Whereas, and I think that also ties into that negative space I was talking about with Sundara, where the absence of those stat blocks really works in our favor. And plus, it's pretty easy. Well, I mean, pretty easy from a mechanical storyteller's standpoint to create new D&Ds. I played around with that a bit in Supplements of the Dragon's Breath Mountains, but hey, for any of you Elven players out there, we are not up for having another Birth of Slaanesh. We're not up for
Yet.
that. Yes, yet he says so. So none of that bullocks quite yet.
Yeah, that does actually hit on another interesting tidbit of its when you have a world that has like a very dense history or a dense mythology or a dense whatever, it does make it very difficult for players and storytellers to kind of put themselves into the world and into the story. And it's a thing I've found both with players and with storytellers of I have lost count of the number of folks who decide like I really like this game and I really like these aspects of the setting, but they don't know it that well. So then they'll try to put together a character, they'll try to put together a campaign, and then like I as gently as I can try to be that guy of I appreciate what you're doing here, but you are not aware of like these aspects of the canon setting. And I'm not saying you can't do this thing, but you need to be aware that you are changing the canon and ask what effects that will have on the game going forward. It's very similar to running things like World of Darkness or certain, Warhammer Fantasy or 40K of there are lots of big established meta plot lines and they can be kind of binding if you're not deeply learned in a lot of the aspects. And this often leads to folks either trying to go very small and they'll do, what's the phrase like there are a million worlds among the Imperium of Man and we have books for four of them. So
Mhm.
and so you'll have folks who like make their own planet with their own governor and their own everything that's never had anything important happen there. So this is going to be completely removed from the events of the rest of the canon. None of you know about it. Or you'll have, game masters and players who try really hard to tweak and change aspects of canon. And that can usually lead to a cascade of like, well, if you changed this thing, then this event would have happened differently, which means that now this thing is going to be different. And that can be a lot of fun if you want to do that as a mental exercise, but it can be exhausting to be doing that while also trying to run a game. And it was very much a thing I wanted to save people the effort on, but it also, speaking of negative space, gets to the fact that Sundara is very much a ground level setting. Like so many of the settings that we read, like they talk about like the great lords of Dragon Reach, and they talk about these the heroes of I don't know whatever other cool name because my brain is fried. But they focus very much on those big images and those big historical things, forgetting that yeah we're all still going to start this at level 1 to 5 depending on like how generous you want to be with power levels, and that can be it's a lot harder to start really small when the rest of the world is focused on like the big players, as opposed to starting in a world that was geared for small stuff. And then if the game keeps going, because as I'm sure you're aware, most games do not reach level 20 once they're started. Uh,
Right? I was so happy after 5 years on and off and playing when one of my games we finally got to level 20 Mythic 10. That felt so good.
nice. And it's a thing that for folks who looked at my other game, Army Men, of I very much did not design it with that like level 20 epic capstone in mind. Of if you can get there, cool. Yes, more power to you. But I know that most players, most game masters, they're not going to get there, and focusing so much on that can make it feel like a failure when your game only reached like level 7 or level 12, or like your plot really got resolved around level 13, which is where if you're playing Pathfinder stuff starts getting super crunchy. And this is when it turns into rocket tag of like one thing going wrong or going your way. It can be the difference between, oh, that was a walk in the park. That was the easiest encounter ever. And party wipe, start over. And it's one of those of because I know so many gamers, especially if you're new to the setting, you're not going to want to start at like a really beefy character level. You're going to want to start small. You're going to want to explore the game. You're going to want to walk through the small towns, meet all the NPCs, like fight some, I don't know, deal with some banditry or whatever problem du jour it is you're dealing with, and just kind of explore the setting and find what parts of it really hit you. And especially because as I mentioned, like I wanted people to have access to more solutions than just I hit it real hard with my hammer until it stops moving. And it's the example I've given of like, hey, there's this company of mercenary orcs. They are bothering this town because the town has resources and they don't. How do you solve this? I'm like, yeah, you could get your party together and you could go out and you could ambush them and you could kill all of them and get all the XP and congratulations, you've solved it. Or you could like get together, find out like how much tax does this village pay in a year? What is the going rate of this mercenary company? Can you negotiate a truce and hire them to be the town guard so that nobody else pulls this same scheme? Do if somebody in your group has like a background of like rich parents, or if you're mid-level and you have enough money, can you just hire them and have them staff your fortress because you took leadership last level? So now you have this old abandoned fort that needs somebody to watch it. Those are still legitimate ways to solve the problem. Getting XP shouldn't be your main concern. It should be like, did we solve the problem in a way that means that we get to either be the heroes or the villains of the day, but the problem's done. And that is a mindset that can be very difficult to get some players and a lot of game masters into because they focus so much not just on what is the goal, what are we trying to achieve, but how do you have to achieve it? What are the hoops you have to jump through to get there? And that is just as you mentioned, it can feel like you're having a lot of your creativity taken away from you. If you find two or three other solutions that aren't what the game master thought of, and then eventually you just kind of like, well, I guess we challenge their champion and hope that we win. Yeah, it's not really what I wanted to do, but yeah, we can.
And that you actually opened up a few things here that I feel are worth talking about. So thank you. First off, as a game master myself, in high school, I was what we call the forever GM.
Mhm.
But and I still kind of am, but more so because I like it. But when I was running that campaign with my wife and my best friends, some of the greatest moments we had at the table was when they solved the problem in a way that I hadn't expected. And it got to a point where when I would sit down to do my session prep, I wouldn't at all write out a plan for how the problem was supposed to be solved. I would go, okay, this is kind of the setup we have going on. This is the problem, and this is what we have after the problem. That, of course, can be tweaked. And the other thing, when we talk about multiple ways to solve the problem from both the standpoint of the players and the GM. I know you wholeheartedly agree with me when I talk about the importance of having a session zero, but also even after those first few sessions, the group still needs time to find what is its general vibe, for lack of a better term. And so having those multiple ways, that can really help everyone, especially if these are people who have never played together before. Like, how are we gonna work together? How are we gonna figure this out? And I think I think that's something that has really gone down a bit as we've seen more people coming into tabletop from video games, particularly MMOs. Mind you, this isn't a tangent saying that video games or MMOs are evil or anything like that. I enjoy video games every now and then. Um, but yeah, that overall social aspect I feel is something that's gotten a bit more forgotten. And so having aspects like that.
Yeah. I had a thought and then it left. I'm gonna try. Oh, there it is. I found it again. So, question for you and question for anyone watching this video who wants to weigh in the comments below because questions make the algorithm happy and that lets us keep doing this. But what is a type of product that you feel we have not made for Sundara yet that would add to it as a setting or that would really help people come into it and really find their footing? Because it's a thing I've tried to do, and I'm sure you've tried to do as well. Of so many of the things that we give folks are they're all doors. Any of these are a perfectly good door to come into the setting. You don't need to read all of them, but any one of them is perfectly functional. So, like, if someone wants to grab one of the species books, if they want to grab one of the cities books, if they want to read about how, like, the Prim and the gods work, all of these are perfectly fine ways to come in. But, I know that, we're a very small staff and we can only do so much at a time. So, what is a thing you think folks would really get good use out of that we haven't made yet?
Well, in this, I might end up answering a question with another question because I feel like this ties into a thought that was kicking around throughout this conversation. Because you've made a lot of archetypes for various classes, and how do we feel about prestige classes? We haven't really explored those in Sundara yet. But what one of the things I appreciate about your archetypes is how you really push the boundaries of not only what the classes are supposed to do, but also what the rule structure is meant to do. Like in particular, when I was preparing my outline for my novella on Mawood. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Mawood. Got it. Okay. All right. So be on the lookout for that, folks. Novella number 3 by Isaiah Burt. I was reading The Half Dead and I noted how you had resistance to like cold and non-lethal damage bundled into one, and this also applied to non-lethal damage incurred from starvation. It's like, wow, the game doesn't ordinarily do that, but here's this little twist. And so with prestige classes, that's definitely an aspect of the setting that hasn't been covered yet, but there's definitely more room to push those boundaries. Because I know the typical Pathfinder orthodoxy is archetypes all the time, prestige classes were 3.5, but I think there's still a group of people like myself who like prestige classes.
I like them myself. I have played most of the ones that I had my heart set on. There are still a couple I haven't gotten to yet. But I also think I would add to that of yes, but it's that I feel a lot of the time the best use of a prestige class is to really tie something to a setting. As like for an example, for Pathfinder, like the prestige class they gave us for the Hell Knight or for the Eagle
Mm.
Knights or
Oh,
for all
love
of
the Hell
those of like
Knights.
it was all of the thing that really ties you to like an in-world power structure or an in-world bit of lore. And I would say like that would be like one of the only times I would want to maintain that kind of rigid thought of like I think that as a good example, we have the airships. We've gotten a one archetype for them now. I would probably do something like I don't know, like a Aether Privateer, something like that, and just figure out like, all right, people want to play Sky Pirates. What do you need? And then just even beyond what you would get in like a prestige class or beyond what you would get just taking like a naval archetype and changing it to something for the air of what is something that is unique to what you would get out of Horde Reach. Like what kind of training do you get? What like ties to the Dragon Works do you
Oh,
have? Things like that.
oh man, no, that actually, because my first thought when you were talking about that was going back to Ironfire and Scarlet Company,
Yeah.
because we have the archetype for the Scarlet Company. That's the Cavalier archetype that you all can
Mhm.
find in Sellswords of Sundara, along with my personal pet favorite, the Risen Legionnaire. Love the
Yes.
Risen, the
They're so
love,
much fun.
love the Risen Legionnaire. But we could definitely have a prestige class to represent a higher ranking member of the Scarlet Company. And I mean, I suppose duelist under the core rulebook might work well, but what about that member of the Scarlet Company who is like a paladin and is set on wearing full plate and all that? Like, wouldn't it be cool to have that paladin who is decked out in full plate but holds a pistol in one hand and a rapier in the other and is still dexterous as all get out?
Gonna note that. Yes, that'll be the
Right?
Scarlet Captain. There we go. We're gonna
Right?
set this. Just put a pin in that. If folks want to see that, we will add that to a future book.
Well, and the other thing I thought of when you brought up Horde's Reach, tying it to Horde's Reach, is for those individuals, like my mercenary company of orcs who have earned the right to serve as the champions of one of the dragon rulers. So Dragon Disciple might work well for modeling that, but we could potentially do a modified version of that that plays a bit more into the Wehrmacht feats that
Yeah, I
we're
was gonna say like,
presenting.
Worm Mark Champion done. Boop.
Yeah, right?
There we go. We got 2 to 3, just ready to rock. But yeah, it's I will say last thought that I have on that is I would probably want to go back and add a couple more cities so that way we have more places to tie stuff to.
Mhm,
Because we've got I think 3 or 4 cities that I have notes on of they're mentioned in the other books, but we never go there, we never do anything with them. So there's the cities on either side of the desert where Maud is in the middle, and then there's a city I want to do in like the ruined north, which is I was thinking about doing some cities that were not wholly made up of non-human species, but just kind of a glimpse of this is how they live when they didn't have a huge number of humans in their midst. So you have, like, what is a city that was predominantly settled by like dwarves and gnomes, or what was a city like this was mostly elves for whatever reason. Either, it was too difficult to get to, or it was too well guarded, or it was just not comfortable for folks who had not had their adaptations to live here. And I think prestige classes would be a great way to tie those back into the standard cities that we already have from the first wave,
mhm.
and just sort of give everybody extra flavor and make it very clear. And this is the thing I mentioned several times in the books that I like to remind folks of no matter how big the world is, people travel. It's like anytime
Mhm.
there's the game master joke, I was like, oh well, how would one of X get here in Y? It's like he has feet. He just walked.
Right? I swear that was one of the my least favorite questions that would be presented to me when I was trying to make a character for AD&D, where it's like, well, I want to have like, this and this. Well, how did he get here? I don't think I could justify that.
Yes. His
Yeah.
parents emigrated 3 generations ago. What do you want from me?
Right?
Man, just to finish out that question, a thing I would really like to add, and this is partially because I'm working on something related right now, of because lots of folks have asked why we don't have adventure modules for Sundara, and the biggest reason is quite honestly because selling adventure modules is really hard and they take a lot of extra work to put in because it's not just the writing and coming up with the story and trying to tell the game master, okay, here's like the top 4 ways I can think of that an average party would solve this, but your players are probably going to do something absolutely bananas that I haven't considered. So best of luck to you. But it's you need to get the art, you need to get maps. Maps are the big one. Maps are so expensive. And it's
That
just
the map problem though was something that I navigated around when doing settlements of the Dragon's Breath Mountains because
ah,
Adrian had suggested that uh I use Wadabu like you guys have been using,
yes, that
but
thing is a
after
lifesaver.
but after doing all the writing, I'm like, okay, no, these locations are too fantastical for me to for Whataburger to do justice to. Like, just to give you guys a bit of a taste, my favorites that kind of that ties into the mechs that we were talking about is Prim Anvil, where it's this lake of lava at the center that is raw Prim energy, and people use magic to pull already enchanted dragon steel out of it. So they, and when I'm having locations like that, I'm like, no, I need a bit more detail. So I actually broke down and purchased the Incarnate Pro subscription for
Ooh,
25 bucks a year.
all
It's
right.
25 bucks a year, yeah. Right, super good value. And I was able to custom make the maps. So the UI was super easy. But definitely when you were asking me about what I wanted to see that we hadn't done, I struggled not to say adventure
That's
modules
fair. And it's, yeah,
because
it's because there's so
be-
much that goes into them.
they are like writing an adventure module is harder than writing a novella for all of those reasons that you just listed, on top of the fact that you still have the same base concern as when writing a novella of does that story appeal to this person at this specific moment in time,
Yeah, because I'll be honest, there's some novellas that I want to write set in Ghostboro. Because
right?
I kicked a couple of Whispers and Rumors for the Ironfire collection in, and I was like, that's a really good seed. I want to do a thing with that. Or I could also turn it into, an adventure module if folks were into it. But it's one of those of a piece of advice I will give to folks: if you don't have the cash to throw at programs to make things, if you don't have like you can't just go to your tax prep person and be like, oh, this is part of my job, write it off on my taxes, is find your art first and write your module to your art. I'm currently doing a mission module for Army Men, and that's the reason is they have a whole thing of the central location is in a jail, but I couldn't find a jail. So I found a bank and I wrote like a whole reason why this bank was converted into the local jail so that I can still use the map for it. Oh.
Oh,
So yeah, hopefully that works out really well because it's a lovely map and it would have cost me a lot of money to get something of similar quality, but it was one of those of I did not start work on the adventure until I had gone through and found all of the assets so that I could write
mhm.
around them. Because if I'd written the whole thing, be like, okay, now I need a map that looks like this, it would have been like, well, good luck.
Yeah, yeah, I learned that that lesson the hard way with a few of my other projects. So
Boy.
absolutely recommend that for sure.
Yeah, but I will say if there are folks watching this and you are one of the folks who are really hungry for adventures because you feel that's the best way to get people into the setting, if you can convince folks to buy some of the setting books, if the setting does get really popular, we will absolutely reinvest some of those earnings in order to make sure that that happens. That is my promise to everybody right here. But that is my thoughts. I think we're about at our time. So to close out, folks know you've done stuff for Sundara. Where else can they find stuff that you have made? Guess do a nice little plug here for the end of it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. You're much too kind to me. So the other setting that I'm big on is the Instruments of Jahan setting done by Concept Moon Media. That really kickstarted the resurgence of my freelance writing. So the one that I've been howling about is my novella Osborne, eh, and it is about a polar bear berserker who throws around lightning bolts and is on a quest to find his wife who was taken from him. Right?
The
Right?
heaviest of
Yeah.
metal.
It is no, literally, it is the heavy metal novella that I wrote for the setting. And so you can find Osborne on Amazon. You can buy a paperback copy. If you for those who are feeling particularly generous, if you want to reach out to me and send me some money via PayPal, I will be happy to sign and inscribe a copy to you and mail it. That is absolutely on the table. But yeah, so I've been working a lot on that. So if you like pretty much Game of Thrones meets Redwall. Keep an eye out for that. And I'm working on having a introductory module for a tabletop system of my own design out
Ooh,
just in time for Free RPG Day.
very nice. And
So
yeah,
that's what I got.
yeah, to piggyback off of that, if folks are looking for a murder mystery series starring a cat, check out my novels of Marked Territory and Painted Cats. You can also get those on Amazon. Links for most, if not all of this, will be in the description below. So don't bother following what we're saying too closely. But you can find both of our work at Azukail Games on DriveThruRPG. You can like and subscribe here on the channel to stay abreast of all of our nonsense. And hopefully, we'll have a bunch of new game stuff coming out in the near future. And Isaiah, thanks for joining me as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Neil.
All right. And for the rest of you, like I said, like, subscribe, and ask us any questions you have down below. And hopefully, if we get enough questions, we can do another one of these. Till next time, happy gaming, everybody.